Go to any congregation on a Sunday morning, look at the age structure, and you know that in 20 years' time the bottom drops out of the church. Statistically, that is the case, that the generation my age upwards, we all move on, and in 2030, if you look at the age structure of the church across the country, there is not many people left. The sociologist David Verras, he and a colleague did a study of belief and faith across Europe, and what they found was that in every country, every generation was less religious than the generation before. They attended church less often, they prayed less often, they had less belief. They use the phrase fuzzy fidelity. You get a generation who's church going. The next generation has a sort of fuzzy fidelity, a fuzzy relationship to church. They're kind of supportive, but they're not really involved. Generation after that has much less commitment. Generation after that, virtually no commitment. They would say that the modern world has no room for Christian faith, no wonder the church is in decline. Others of us would say, well, maybe the problem is that the church hasn't adapted to this changing world. So it's a bit like the cinema audiences in the 1980s, which were declining, and a lot of people said, well, that's because of television. So inevitable that cinema attendance will decline. But the cinema owners and the managers, they took a different view. And they said, no, the problem is that if you look at these cinemas, they're dark, they're dingy, they smell, etc., etc. And so they completely revamped their buildings, they completely revamped the cinema experience, and attendance began to rise. Not a perfect comparison with church, but it demonstrates, I think, that it is possible for institutions that appear to be in decline to reverse the decline if they accept that there are things that they can do. Many of us would say that fresh expressions may be a sign of how it is that the church adapts, because what these new types of church are doing is they're much more based around people where they live their lives. You get them certainly in the residential part of people's lives, but you also get them in leisure centres, you get them in pubs and cafes, of course. Some are emerging in the workplace, and there is a hint there that we could see church reconnecting with whole swathes of life that it's become largely disconnected from, thanks to the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, church was right at the centre of the village. It was at the centre of work, the saints' days and the feast days, centre of holiday. Church was right at the heart of life. But with the Industrial Revolution, you had a separation between work and home, and church stayed with the home bit of life, and not much of church went with the work bit of life. In the 20th century, of course, you had the expansion of leisure. Church wasn't there either, wasn't particularly present in the political movements and the ecology movements. Well, church in every context, which is kind of what these fresh expressions are beginning to point to, suggests something rather different. First of all, I think there's a big room still for traditional forms of church. I think we don't live in a culture which is either or, we live in a culture that's both and people can be very modern in one part of their lives and very traditional in another part of their lives. So I would expect, and we see this already happening to some extent, I would expect to see more and more people attending both new innovative types of church but also more traditional forms of church. I came across a fresh expression. I wouldn't call themselves that, but they call themselves a heavy metal congregation. And they do something once a month with the Anglo-Catholic Church around the corner. Very interesting. Not what you'd expect perhaps, but here you are, the new and the traditional fitting together. So that, I think, will be one part of the picture. Another part of the picture, I suspect, will be a polarization between the large and the small. I think we'll find lots of very small churches that are quite intimate and friendly in that kind of way, and then there'll be larger churches, 250, 500 people, 1,000, which have all the facilities you could ever want in terms of child the provision for children and young adults and teenagers and masses of courses and all the rest for adults, and where there are terrific benefits because of their size. And I think you'll get both those. Fresh Expressions maybe in both those camps, who knows, time will tell. I think the middle-sized churches, as we're already seeing, of 150, 120 people, I think they're going to continue to be squeezed. I think these new Fresh Expressions, there are many more than we realise. Some of the research that's being done now into some of the dioceses in Liverpool and Canterbury are showing that. My own experience is exactly the same. I keep bumping into people who are doing and involved in what we would call Fresh Expressions. They don't call it that. They're right under the radar, but there they are. So I think that there are many more of these new types of church emerging than we realise. I think that's a huge source of hope. But we could see many more if the existing church really wants to get behind it and support it. Big challenge is for existing church. Are they going to really put resources into this? If you don't put resources into something new, no one notices. But if you take away resources from something that already exists in order to put resources into something new, then everyone screams. So it's not surprising that existing church finds it really hard to put resources into these new forms of church. But we need training for the lay leaders of these churches. We need training for the clergy who kind of oversee these churches and link them up. We need resources. There is a huge amount we need to do if we're going to build on what is a grassroots movement. If we don't build on it, I think it'll happen anyway, but it won't happen nearly to the extent. But if we do build on it, then I think we could see a huge revival in the church.